This is Death or Prison, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org.
Hello, welcome to the Death or Prison podcast, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I'm Oswald Newbo.
And I'm Kevin Sabath.
And back with us today is Tramell Thomas. The last episode when we had Mel in here with us, he had just been convicted and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He's 20 years old. At the age of 20, and the judge just told you were sentenced to 45 years in prison. Mel, what did you feel? What was going through your mind?
I believed that my life was over. I was 20 years old, and my whole world was just gone. I believe everything just turned dark at that time. Literally turned dark. A matter of fact, my original sentence was 55 years, suspended after 45 with 5 years probation, which was unheard of. Right. You know, it was really an illegal sentence, and I would later be resentenced to 45 flat. But when I received that 55 suspended after 45, at the age of 20, I was shaking in my boots. I was done. Everything went dark. I couldn't see. That's a football number. That's a football score. That's something that you hear on a Sunday score 45-3, 45-15. Right. You know, now I'm receiving that as a sentence.
Powerball numbers.
You know,
you're 20 years old. That's twice your age, plus some.
Yes, and so at that young age, you know, if you're 20, 19, we think we're men. We think we're adults. We're still young. I was still young. I was still confused on the inside, not knowing that. But so the 45 years, I end up receiving 45. I would later be transferred to the state prison, Summer State Prison, and then we were transferred in old ice cream trucks and locked
ice
cream trucks,
little box wagons,
the box wagons,
yeah.
And
the metal seat in the back, they slide and turn it.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
right.
And
That's
so,
a hard ride.
Yeah, so
you
started off, you know, on metal and dark. You know, it's like the prison system wants everything to be dark. And it's not the prison system, but it's the enemy. The enemy literally wanted my life just to remain dark. I would travel to Summer State Prison in 1988, and right then and there, when I came into Summer State Prison, many didn't know, but I was afraid. At 20 years old, I was afraid, but I couldn't show. I couldn't show the fear, but I was afraid of the unknown, afraid of the uncertain. You know, what's my life gonna look like? Because I don't know what it is to be behind bars.
Had you heard stories about prison before you got there?
About prison and whatnot. But then once I got in, my first night there, we're packed into this holding area, and the holding area is right on the main hallway, and so you see just myriads of men walking up and down the hallway. And I never forget, I was sitting down real quickly. I was sitting down, and this gentleman peeped into the window and pointed at a gentleman sitting down right next to me. I thought he was pointing to me, and he pointed to him. And so the next morning, as we got into our cell that night, the next morning they called breakfast call, and I come downstairs to go to breakfast, and we're waiting to go to breakfast. As we come out to the main corridor to go to breakfast, the gentleman that was sitting down next to me was slashed in his neck.
Wow.
That was that was my introduction into Summer State Prison. And so at the age of 20, you know, and so I remember calling home, and I forgot who I talked to, but I remember saying, this is real up here.
Yeah.
So for the next 10 years of my life in prison, you know, it was just dark. You know,
did you have any support while you was in prison? Were you in contact with your mother, your father?
So I was in contact with my mother. My mother was a praying woman. She constantly prayed for me. She prayed for me when I first got arrested, and prayed. She prayed a prayer that I'll never forget. She prayed and said, "Ask God, said, Lord, whatever you do, do not allow the enemy to take my son's mind." And I believe it was that direct prayer, that kept me all those years, that the enemy can do anything he wanted to do, but he would not take my mind. And so that was my mother's prayer over me. And so my mother would visit me, my sisters would visit me. I had friends that were still coming to see me. But for 10 years, I was still just running the hallways, selling cocaine, still getting high on the inside, but I was lost on the inside, lost in dark. And I would later, about 10 years into the sentence, that's when I would begin to start taking a real inventory of my life. And I just didn't want this. I wasn't going home.
Something had to cause that shift. What caused that shift? Well, you just got tired of, doing time? You got tired of,
In 1992, I believe it was, 1992, 1993, I just said, I'm done with this. I don't want this anymore. I don't know, but it was something in me that said, I just want to step away from this. And
you stepping away from the game?
Yeah, I was stepping, but it was, I believe it was at that time that God was starting to get a hold of my heart. And I stepped away from it, but it would still be years later before I would turn my life over. Turn my life over to the Lord. But it was then that I came out in the yard one day, in the big yard, I looked over there and I saw a lot of these guys that was part of the gang. I said, half of these guys wasn't even out there when I was running the street, And so I remember I walked over and I said to a couple of the brothers, I said, man, I'm done with this. And they said, Mel, man, do whatever you gotta do, man. You're always gonna be ECB, because that's where I'm from Elm City. Right. And so you're always gonna be ECB. And so God had literally gave me just a way to move away from that. And I would later just still be, but I was still connected to the family because I'm Big Mel. Right. You know what I mean? And still connected to the family. So later in my sentence, after getting moved to another facility, there would be a stabbing take place, and my name would come up in it because of ECB. And I was doing dirt, but I didn't do the stabbing. But yet they put me in SEG because they was afraid of retaliation against me. And so I would go to SEG, and here's where
SEG is segregation.
Yeah,
that's like
so segregation, locked up and confinement,
separated from general population,
confinement.
Right.
Here's where God began the shift. This was 1996. I'm in another facility when that happened. They would not let me back in population because they was afraid of retaliation. But God was going to send me to a facility where he would have a servant waiting on me.
Wow.
And so I would get shipped to this facility called Garner Correctional Facility. I'll never forget, because it was there that God would get a hold of my heart. And that my life would never, ever, ever be the same. That where I was in darkness, now my life was about to step into light. Right. And when I got there, I started working in the kitchen. Still, this was 23, almost like 23 hours lockdown. And so, but I'm working in the kitchen, and it's a gang facility, but yet they had a couple dorms for a regular population, which I went into. But I'm working in the kitchen, and me and two other inmates were there, and we're chilling, and I got 45. He has 60. Another one had like 55. And the servant of God walks up to us while we're working in the kitchen and says this. He says, "Hey, Mel." He came to me and said, "Hey, Mel, we're having the church is having a program this weekend called Prison Fellowship, and I want you to come." And for him to have the boldness to come up in the midst of all three of us, you knew it was God that sent him there. Right. And he literally said, "Mel." He didn't say, he didn't call Gorilla or LeRon. He said Mel. And so that was God calling me right then and there. And so I said, okay. I said, I'll be there. Just to me, I just said I'd be there. So God had been drawing me. And he had the place where he was going to meet me. And it was there that weekend. I remember the weekend. I was leaving the kitchen, and that day I was excited. I was excited about going to Prison Fellowship. I'm like, here this tough guy, and I'm excited about going to a church event. And so I get to the dorm, and I'm taking a shower, and the officer screams up, "Thomas, you know, you're on the list to go. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in the shower now. And I stopped and I said, man, I'm excited about going here. And so I would go there, and there I would hear the gospel preached with such love, you know, for prisoners. There I heard the gospel preached to me, a prisoner, you know, not just incarcerated for murder, but a prisoner that was incarcerated to sin. And it was there that God just wrapped his arms around me. And for the first time, you know, the gospel was real to me. I wasn't just going to church. For the first time, I gave my life over to Jesus Christ, and my life was totally changed from that point.
From that point, and when you gave your life over to Christ.
He fulfilled that abandonment.
Yes, that was...
All the time, he was there, just waiting patiently in place.
Yes.
That's powerful. That's powerful. If you can tell something to our listeners and our viewers right now, what is it that you would like to share with them? Something very impactful. What is it that you would like to share with them?
One of the things that I think as a prisoner, it has to be hope. Inside, only thing that you have to hold on to is hope. And what hope looks like to a prisoner is freedom. What hope looks like to a homeless person is to have a home. So I know what it means to be lost in jail and looking for freedom. But I just want to share with all the listeners and all the viewers that when Jesus Christ came into my life, he brought hope on the inside. I would still be incarcerated for another 20 years before coming home. But hope had finally came to me in the person of Jesus Christ. And my freedom began not when I got out, but my freedom began on the inside when Jesus came in. And so one thing I want to share with you is that when Jesus came into my life, he began the restoring process that brought me here today to speak to you, that if you don't know Jesus Christ, cry out to him. He's calling on you. He's drawing you. The Death to Prison podcast is here today because we want you to know that in Jesus Christ there is hope. There is hope. If I could leave one thing with you, God was speaking to me and I wanted to share this with you. In the book of Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, there was a man that was in the tombs and he was cutting himself. But God was coming across the seas to see about this man that was in those tombs. And that's where we were at one time in jail, in those tombs. And while he was sitting there, Jesus would come and he would set him free right in the tombs. Whatever your tomb is today, Jesus is coming there. I'm speaking that to you right now, that Jesus is going to meet you right in your tomb and he's going to set you free. That gentleman would later be found clothed in his right mind, set free from all those demons that had him in bondage. So I just want to let you guys know that there is hope in Jesus, and hope is coming into the prison. You don't have to get out. Jesus is coming in.
I noticed something, and I'll say this to the audience. Here it is. We have Brother Mel was in a point of his life where he felt abandoned. He was going through a point in his life where he said he had checked out. There was a point in his life where he said life was just dark. And here it is in prison, a young man, or maybe an older man. Was he young or old?
He was younger than me.
A young man comes up into the midst of him in a crowd. He's standing around and says something to him, Mel, I'd like for you to come to church. This is what I see in that testimony you gave. When you said it was dark, God had already started to shine that light.
Amen. That's right.
He followed that light and came to it.
That's right.
In that moment you accepted Jesus, from then you say your life was forever changed.
Yes.
That light is for real.
And the thing is, it was right then and there that he began his redemptive, his restoration in my life. It was right then and there that God would begin to, I remember a gentleman came, close friend of the family's, he would come and he would speak a word to me. He came in and visited me, and he had heard that God that came into my life, and he shared this. He said, Mel, he says, you're going to have favor like Joseph. He says, God's going to give you favor in these jails to the point where they're not going to know what to do with you. that prophetic word began to come true in my life. Every single jail from that point on,
Favor.
I just began to move with the favor of God.
Amen.
With the favor
Amen.
of God. God would move me from jail to jail. And one of the things that I want to share with the listeners is that kind of favor was that God was with me. It said that God was with Joseph. Wherever he went, God was with him. That's the favor of Joseph, is that the presence of God was with me. And so when I talk about the restoration, I didn't realize that I had a child out there. I would later get released. Matter of fact, just let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
My sisters would come visit me later on.
It's getting good, y'all. Pay attention. It's getting real good.
After I got moved to that facility, my sisters would come visit me. And the whole time I was incarcerated, my sisters were saying, Mel, Lisa had a baby and, that's your daughter. And I would say, she never told me anything. The last conversation I had from her was, we're breaking up. And so she said, she had a daughter and that daughter looks just like you. And so I would say, she never said anything to me. So for years, Lisa would contact my sisters and how's Mel doing? And my sisters would say, Mel, Lisa asked about you. And I would say, tell her to write me. And every day I would look for a letter from her, but no letter. One of the things over the years, those 30 years, I never had any resentment towards Lisa. And God had did that. Because he knew that Lisa and I was created for one another. And so fast forward, my sisters come and visit me around 2014, not knowing I would be released in a few years. And my sister said, you haven't seen your daughter. I said, no. So when we get back, we're going to send you a picture of your daughter. So they sent me a picture of my daughter. And I was like, for the first time I saw a picture of my daughter, I pulled off of Facebook. And but I didn't realize that God was setting something up. So in this facility, I got the favor of Joe, so I can come and go as I want. I had a job where I was just a favor. And I remember one day the Lord spoke to me. The Lord spoke to me. And I really want you guys to remember, when God begins to speak to you, listen. Listen, because he's going to lead you. That voice is going to lead you. So I remember one day he spoke to me while I was at my job, and he says, Mel, get up and go back to the block. And so I said, I never go back to the block. I'm always here. So get up, go back to the block. I got up, went to the block. And so the officer says, Mel, what are you doing back in the block? I said, I don't know. You know what I mean? So I get back in the block and I'm looking around and I go to this table. And these men are talking, these young men are talking. They're talking about church. And so I immediately, they immediately asked me, Brother Mel, you want to share something? So I just shared a few words. But then I saw this one guy and I looked at him and I said, man, what is your name? He told me, I said, what church do you go to? So he says, I go to Cornerstone. I said, do you have a pastor? So he says, yeah, man, I have a pastor. I said, your pastor know you're here? He says, no, Mel, your pastor needs to know that you're here so he can continue to point. I said, what is your pastor's name? He says, Alfred Watts. Remember back in the beginning, Alfred was on the phone with my sister.
Right.
Alfred Watts was now a pastor. And so I said, hold on, Alfred Watts? He said, Alfred Watts. I says, does he have a sister? So he starts thinking, yeah, man, I think he does got a sister. And he said, and she got this beautiful daughter. You got to see her daughter, Mel. And so I'm just listening.
Wow.
And so I said, man, when you get finished, come by my cell and let me talk to you. So he comes by. I pull a picture out. I said, is this her? He said, yes, Mel, that's her. That's her. And so I'm just looking. He says, Mel, is that? And I'm like, I haven't heard anything yet, but by now I know.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so God was
Restoring.
leading me. He was restoring. He was going to restore everything.
Complete restoration. Right.
Yes. Listen, and that's what I want to share with the listeners and the viewers, that no matter where you find yourself at, God is going to restore you. Hope is going to bring restoration in your life. See, God first brought hope back when he came into my life, but then he began the restoration to take place in my life. And so I would later get released to a halfway house. I was staying in a halfway house for a year. My second, when I came home after 29 years, and introduced to Facebook. I'm introduced to a whole new culture. And I made it go on Facebook, and I'm looking for Cornerstone.
So let me ask you a quick question. Were you released based on any technicalities within your sentence, or you just made it out?
Game time.
One day my counselor came to me and said, Mel, you're eligible for a a early halfway house.
Wow.
And with a murder sentence, that was unheard of.
Yeah.
It's unheard of
Community.
to, you know what I mean, get a halfway house. I get into the halfway house, and God is just amazing. I go on Facebook, and I'm creeping on Facebook. I don't know. But I'm looking on Cornerstone, and I'm looking at Alfred Watts, who is now my pastor. I'm looking at him. This is the young guy that was on the phone with my sister.
Right.
And God is just showing me what he's about to do in my life, but I don't know it at the time. And so later, I would start working. And so it was this program called Family FRP, Family Reunification Pass. So after you're in the halfway house and you're working, you're eligible for that FRP. My first one, I would go down and see my family. I come back, and my sister Tasha will call me and says, Lisa said, call her. I said, Lisa who? Lisa. Said, call her. So I would call her, and called her that night, and we talked. And we would later talk some more. And so my second trip down, I would meet Lisa for the first time in over 30 some odd years.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
And so we would begin to just see one another. And now she's divorced, I'm divorced. You know, so much has happened.
Restoration, complete restoration.
And so later we knew once we got back together that it was meant for us to be together. And so
y'all still had that same fire that y'all had prior?
Same
this time
fire.
it was real, but this time it was unadulterated.
It was if you ask her, it was as we never ever missed a beat. You know, God
that's that good love.
God restored us. God restored us.
Okay.
And so I would meet my daughter, and not only that, but I would meet my 5-year-old grandson. So I came home to not only Lisa, but a family.
Double.
So when I say that God will restore, I'm not just saying this. This is what I have experienced. The restoration, the full restoration of God in my life. Later in 2017, Lisa and I would get married. We would become deacons in our church. We go all over sharing God's love with whoever will listen. Right. It's just amazing. It's amazing what God can do. I just want to leave you with this word. Hope and restoration is coming to you. There's a revival that's going to take place on the inside. God is already stirring your heart right now. The Lord Jesus is already stirring your hearts right now. Many of you think that it's over. Many of you think that it's dark. But Jesus says that he is the light of the world. And if you open up your heart and let that light in, everything that was dark has to give way to that light. And I believe that the Lord is going to bring hope and restoration into your life. Just let him in. Just let him in.
Mel, you've been home 6 years now. You're married, lovely wife, your daughter, your grandson, everything is going good. I need to ask, how are things going in community with you? What's going on? What are you doing in community these days?
I serve at the church that he has placed me in, Cornerstone Christian Center in Milford, Connecticut, as a deacon, lead deacon, along with my wife. I'm also the leader of the men's ministry, which is just my passion. Just speaking into men and working with men. We do life groups, just fellowshipping with other Christians. I also have just such an honor to go into these different men's facilities, sober houses, and just pour into men. And one of the things that I share when I go in is I want to be a message of hope. What you're hearing today is a person who was lost. God gave me this vision, and I believe I have to share this. I have to share this before, because this might be the only opportunity that I share this with you. But God gave me a vision of a hand. And when he showed it to me like this. And inside the hand was all types of jewels and all types of gems. And he said to me that in my hand, Mel, these are all those that society has just given up on. The prisoners and the drug addicts, those that society has locked away. But they're gems. And many people, sometimes the church, looks at those gems in God's hand. They don't see them the way God sees them. But God was showing me that you and I are gems in the hands of God. And he's ready to turn his hand over and release it on the world. And so I want to just share this with you. This vision is for you and for I, that God is getting ready to release us. Don't think about your situation, because I was where you're at. God is getting ready to release. You're in the hands of God, and you are a gem in the hands of God. He's getting ready to release you back into your communities, back into your homes, back into society.
Amen. Amen. Them Jews, them some real Jews there.
And that's
bro.
well said. And something I like to bring to the audience is something that the brother Mel here was just speaking about, ministry. One thing I like, you come out of the church. See, one of the problems, and I heard this, the late bishop said to us, he said sometimes the problem with the church is the walls.
The walls.
We want to stay within the walls all day, but we won't go out where the people need help and bring the ministry out of the walls. And you going into the prison, you going into the substance use, you going out on the block. It means everything. Ministry really can't be ministry if you're not delivering it to the people.
It can't be ministry unless you're doing what Jesus says. He says, go. He says, go. Our pastor has literally commissioned us that we're going to go outside the four walls. But Jesus said, go out to the highways and to the byways. Yeah. He said it. He said, not the preacher, but he said it. Go to the highways and the byways and compel them to come.
To come. That's right.
Come. And so in order to get them to come, you have to first
go out there and get them.
go out there and go. Yeah. And so that's what ministry is. Ministry is just service.
Where can that service start? Because we do have guys that's incarcerated that are saved. Do they have to wait to come out?
No. It begins on the inside. On the inside, I was sharing the gospel. On the inside, God shared this, and I know my time is short. But he said to me one day, he says, Mel, when I was in prison, you came and visited me. When I was sick, you came and you saw about me. When I was naked, you clothed me. I was in prison when he shared this verse with me, and that impacted me so much. I was like, Lord, when you, he says, much as you do it to the least around you. And I was around rapists. I was around all types of the lowest. But guess what? God said, Mel, you were low when I found you. He says, so now, as much as you do it to the least of them, you do it unto me. And so I began to minister to the least of them on the inside. And so now it becomes easy when I get out.
We heard a powerful story from our brother Mel today. This is the Death of Prison podcast. And we say, choose life.
One boy and girl, maybe we can change